Hello there. And wherever the day finds you, welcome to this episode of Barry Hawkins Live, hosted not by TJ Miller's skinnier older cousin, not hosted by straight white Jesus. Heavens no. Corporate martyrdom's enough for me. It's hosted by Barry Hawkins. That's what made getting the title so easy. We are here tonight to talk about metrics in effective team level development process. And we begin with throughput. Throughput, also referred to in the Scrum methodology circles as velocity. So let's dive in. What is throughput? Well, throughput is it's a metric that tracks the amount of schedulable work that a team has completed. And the amount of schedulable work completed is averaged over the last 6 development cycles. Scrum would call them sprints. Other, more generic terms. In XP, I think we called them iterations a lot. I don't think we're very dogmatic about that. And I've just come to generally call them development cycles because that's what they are. Because all of those flavors of development process are batch processes, batch process control. And so your batches are completed in cycles. And throughput serves to inform the team as to generally, directionally, how much schedulable work should they be able to pull into a batch and have a really good chance of completing. Because, quite simply, if you look at an average of how much work you completed in the last 6 cycles, that's generally a pretty good directional indicator of how much work you're likely to complete this cycle. So that's what it is. And the number of cycles averaged had, it did vary a lot in the early years, but at this point we're coming into I think we're coming up on 30 years of Scrum. It started in 1994, so we're getting there. And the 6 cycle average has become pretty much the norm. In fact, as we look at what does the effective use of throughput look like, that is what we'll begin with. So in looking at effective throughput for team development process first, let's talk about the rationale for the rolling 6 weeks, the rolling 6-week average. So the idea here is you want to have enough data points in your average to give you a number that doesn't become overly influenced by, just a small number or even a single bad development cycle. But you also don't want so many data points that as you begin to trend up or down, that signal's not strong enough. And what most of us have generally found is that 6 cycle average is a bit of a sweet spot. If you think about the fact that most development teams do tend toward a 2-week development cycle, what that means is that a 6 cycle rolling average is basically looking at trailing quarter, if you will. And trailing quarter, generally, it provides enough smoothing so that a single bad or a single really high, windfall sprint doesn't misinform you, but also it's not so short like if you were doing, trailing 2 quarters or, 6 months, that a downward or upward trend goes unnoticed because there's just too much data for that to be significant. So that's where the 6 weeks came from. It's not too hotly debated, though I will see it with some with some teams, they want to discuss or contest, or they have a real issue with that. And the other most common cycle durations, 1 week and 3 week. With 1 week, you do typically still want that, and with 3 week, but with 1 week, you typically still want that 6 cycle average, because it's still very easy for the trend to be influenced up or down. And I've generally seen 3 weeks having it go trailing 6 still generally works. It is you're looking at a longer time span, so team changes and changes that are happening throughout the calendar year can sometimes take a little bit longer to show up, but not in a way that I've found to be problematic for teams that are using 3 week development cycle lengths. All right, so the second key thing about effective use of throughput in development team process is the volume of completed work is meant to capture or be the sum of backlog items only. That is, the stories and bugs, more on that in a bit, the stories and bugs that went into the backlog were iterated upon in backlog maintenance and then backlog grooming as it gets towards the top, and then pulled into the cycle of the sprint as an informed group commitment. That work, when it completes, that's what gets summed up and is the number for a given development cycle that then goes into the rolling 6 cycle average. I sometimes see, and some agile project management tools will actually systemically encourage teams to actually put not only their backlog items into totaling the sprint, but also their interrupt driven or non-backlog items. That is, bugs, incidents, emergencies. In order to surface them in that team's reporting tool, they'll encourage you, just throw it on in here. Well, the problem there is, remember the purpose of throughput. The purpose of throughput is to inform a team's planning at the start of a development cycle. So if you're including interrupt driven work to calculate that total, you're actually inflating throughput to be not just your schedulable planned work, but also to include your interrupt driven work. And of course, what that would guide teams to do is to plan for and commit to more than they can actually sustainably, responsibly do. Because, as I often talk about, teams have a balance. There's a ratio of schedulable to interrupt driven work when you look at a team's bandwidth. And so with throughput, you want to be sure you're tracking schedulable work in that rolling 6 cycle average, not interrupt driven. All right. So, third, the goal and intent with throughput and how it trends, how it's measured, how we monitor it, the goal is to work toward a degree of stability. That is, as a team normalizes and as the team composition is relatively stable, and as the health of their backlog begins to stabilize, you should also see their throughput begin to stabilize. That is, the velocity is not going up and down. And if you have, if you're tracking the metrics and you have like a bar chart with that rolling 6 cycle average being visualized, the bars should look somewhat similar, right? With deltas for when there's a lot of PTO or company holidays or what have you. But when the team's all there, the amount of schedulable work that gets planned and completed should generally be stabilized. So the anti-pattern that I sometimes see with tracking and measuring and monitoring velocity is that a team, or more often management, views not stability as the goal, but perpetual increase, as if velocity is supposed to just continue to go up and asymptotically approach infinity, which is not the case at all. You should be looking for stability, and if there's a need for increased velocity, then there's a conversation around whether we form more than one team to service that workload, or whether we staff up that team. And by adding members to a team, adding appropriate team members, because there's, depending on how balanced your cross-functional skills are, you can actually add people that will slow the team down. But if you're adding, the right kinds of folks to the team in order to not cause bottlenecks or exacerbate bottlenecks, then you should generally see an increase then, because you're adding to capacity through more team members, not expecting the very same people to just, skyrocket toward the sun in how much they deliver cycle over cycle. The last key aspect of the effective use of throughput that we'll talk about in this session is that uniformity or homogeneity is not the goal. That is, we're not trying to have all teams have matching velocities. This is a common management mistake that I see, and it usually manifests in one of two or both of these ways. One, there's an idea that all teams should have the same velocity, because then it makes it easier for us to, plan out and roadmap or Gantt chart what all of these teams are doing. And what usually follows from that is the second thing, where the solution that is proposed for that is, well, let's come up with a uniform story point scale across the entire organization. Both of these are wrong. The idea of throughput is that the throughput is unique to that team. The throughput is the rate of schedulable work. Now, the way that you use that rate of schedulable work to do planning and projection is you look at their backlog, and the items in their backlog are measured in story points, and throughput is a rolling 6-cycle average measured in story points. So your throughput becomes a caliper, if you will, to be able to go, okay, so 1 cycle, 2 cycle, 3 cycles, 4 cycles. So this item is 4 cycles down, and our cycles are 2 weeks long. So that item is roughly 8 weeks away. And at that point in time, that's usually all the accuracy that you really need. And it's usually all the accuracy that you really have. So don't attempt to have a standard story point scale across an entire organization, because different teams work in different ways. Different teams work on different types of work that have different size distributions. And so when I see things like these uniform story point scales enforced, you tend to have people working in, sorry, just checking that our bandwidth was getting a buffering alert. Hopefully it's going okay. But you have teams like you have DevOps teams who are having to do very, very small, but with, occasional large items working through their backlog queue. And then you have more standard, application or service teams that whose items are more of a distribution in the middle, like some small items, some really large items, but a lot of items in the middle. And then you have teams like data science teams, for example, that have units of work that tend to skew larger, because they're evaluations of models or studies, and those are bigger, a meaningful outcome in that domain tends to skew on the larger size. So if you take that full range of team types and say to all of them, you now all have to have uniform units of measure so that we can plan uniformly, it doesn't go well. It's the pursuit of making things appear more simple and homogeneous than they are, in service of charts, planning, and management control, obviously, or I mean, not obviously, but management control, unfortunately, when the goal, again, of velocity and of development process metrics in general is to help the team understand and have it the most informed planning that they can. And if anything, for management, what I say is that management's use of metrics is these are cues to go and have a conversation with a team about what help or support they need. They're not a thing to put on a dashboard or a report where numbers turn from green to red or what have you so that a team can be punished because that number changed. If you see the number changing, go and have a conversation, gain context and understanding, ask what help is needed. That's the intent, not uniformity. Throughput and assignment of story points are unique to teams. All right, so those are our points to cover for effective throughput this evening. And let's see if we have any live questions before we go to look at the submissions. Right, looks like no live questions at this time. So let's look at the others. What is a good number for the velocity of a team? This is an understandable question. I will say that there's not a good number in general, because, you know, as we spoke about earlier, with uniformity not being the goal, to say, well, it should be this is problematic. Because even when you throw out a number, and issue caveats, it gets abused. But you know what? Let's keep it fun. I will talk about a number. I generally tell a team when a team's just getting started and they're like, well, how many story points? Like, you have the 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13. How much, how much should we assign to a given item? We don't know where to start. And how much work should we put? How many points should be in a sprint? An exercise that I've often done with teams is to say, well, think of 100 points as a body of work that would take every single one of you, all hands on deck, for at least half the sprint or the development cycle. And so, in a body of work that you would take on, that would mean in the development cycle that a 20 that would fit within that 100, that's really big, right? Because that's almost 20%, or if it ended up being a little more than 100, it's still pretty big. Likewise, a 1, 2, or 3 should be a relatively small item in that sprint. So as you get to 3 and then into 5, those are probably good middle of the road, meaty, but still on the smaller side of meaty items. And so you can start with saying, well, what if we said, like, starting with 100 and see what happens. What I typically do is I start teams with that number, but then they very quickly calibrate to their own, because it sort of breaks the tension, and then they feel comfortable assigning their own and discussing their own story point values to assign to their items. And then we never talk about the 100 again. So you can try what I just laid out, but at the end of the day, there is no good number. The good number is a stable number, a number that's generally stable, because that stability is a reflection of the team being stable, their backlog being in good condition, and they're not being hit by surprises and things, perpetual emergencies coming in hot. All right, next. Do you count bugs in velocity? Yes, sometimes. My advice is the only bugs that should be counted in velocity are bugs that were put into the backlog, moved up through the backlog, and got pulled into a sprint. Bugs that emerge in a sprint, if they are bugs that are on stories that you're working on, that bug and that bug's resolution, those are just additional tasks and task hours in completing that story. A bug that you discover that's not part of what you're working on, that gets evaluated as, should this be an interrupt driven thing that we handle in this development cycle, or is this something that could go into the backlog based on what the severity and the impact and priority is of that bug. So generally, bugs that get counted toward velocity are the ones that got a chance to go into the backlog and travel through it, not things that just hit the team or issues that were found in developing and delivering a given user story. Lastly, what metrics do you use besides velocity? Well, good news, I think. I only use 2 development process. When it comes to development process metrics, the only 2 that I use are throughput, which we've been talking about in this episode, and then projected to completed ratio, which is what we'll be talking about in the following episode from this one. Throughput looks at the rolling 6-cycle average, like we've been talking about, to inform a team's planning and to help with projection and planning as you look further out, right? And projected to completed is the ratio of how many points, how much effort does a team pull in, and what is that? How does that compare to the points or effort that they actually complete? So projected to completed. Projected, the points pulled in. Completed, what we actually complete from what we pulled in. And we'll talk more about projected to completed ratio in that episode. So that does it for us in this installment. Thank you, as always, for your time. Please do like and subscribe and click that notification bell so that you can know about future episodes and content and when they're coming, and hopefully be able to join us live and ask your questions in real time. Until then, I'm Barry Hawkins, and may you and your team have the most team health and effective development process you could possibly have. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.